Dive deep into the ruthless arena of American politics, where truth is weaponized and narratives collide. If you crave unfiltered analysis and insider revelations, subscribe, like, and share your views. Don't just watch, engage with the storm brewing before your eyes. The White House briefing room falls silent as Karoline Leavitt takes command of the podium. At 32, the youngest press secretary in American history stands poised, a calculated storm about to break. Her fingers tap rhythmically on a manila folder, the alleged evidence clutched like a weapon. Cal Morgan watches as Leavitt's eyes narrow, scanning the room of reporters with practiced precision. When she speaks, her voice carries the weight of rehearsed outrage. For months, Vice President Harris deliberately concealed President Biden's deteriorating condition from the American people, Leavitt declares, her words slicing through the air. While she smiled for cameras, our border collapsed under her supervision. Flashbulbs erupt as journalists scramble to capture her expression. Cold, confident, deliberate. The folder opens, and she withdraws what she claims are internal memos. The papers tremble slightly in her grip, not from nervousness, but barely contained triumph. President Obama himself, she continues, voice dropping to enhance the revelation, privately described her performance as, quote, catastrophically incompetent. The room erupts. Shouted questions collide mid-air as Leavitt stands unmoved, allowing the chaos she's orchestrated to unfold. On screens across America, the accusations land like artillery shells, each one calculated to inflict maximum damage to Harris's reputation. Behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett watches the broadcast, her expression hardening. Her phone lights up with calls from Harris's team. They need a counteroffensive, and quickly. Meanwhile, Senator Tom Reynolds is already booking primetime slots to amplify Leavitt's claims. In newsrooms nationwide, producers scramble to secure interviews. Laura Ingram's team celebrates. Leavitt has agreed to appear on her show first. Anderson Cooper's producers work frantically to arrange what will inevitably become a confrontational debate. As night falls over Washington, the political machinery shifts into higher gear. Karoline Leavitt has thrown the first punch in what promises to be a brutal fight where truth, perception, and power hang precariously in the balance. In her congressional office, Jasmine Crockett sits motionless before the television, her composure a stark contrast to the political inferno ignited by Karoline Leavitt. The press conference replays for the third time, each viewing only hardening the Congresswoman's resolve. Unlike the journalists frantically scribbling notes, Crockett watches with the calculated patience of a prosecutor identifying inconsistencies in testimony. The screen's cold blue light illuminates her face as she methodically types notes into her tablet. 20 years as a defense attorney before entering Congress had taught her to recognize character assassination disguised as revelation. This wasn't Leavitt's first performance, but Crockett intended to make it her most regrettable. She's using the Obama quote completely out of context, Crockett murmurs, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. Her chief of staff stands nearby, watching her boss compile a defense dossier that grows with each passing minute. Crockett's phone vibrates, Harris's team. She lets it ring twice before answering, her voice dropping to a controlled whisper. I saw it. Tell her not to respond yet. This is exactly what they want, an emotional reaction. Beyond her window, evening descends on Washington as news vans gather outside the Capitol. Tom Reynolds has already appeared on 3 networks, amplifying Leavitt's claims with rehearsed indignation. The media machine hungers for conflict, for the spectacle of political bloodsport. Crockett rises, straightening her jacket with practiced precision. The same precision that once helped her navigate courtrooms, where she was often the only black woman present. She remembers Harris telling her once, "In politics, they attack hardest when they fear you most." With methodical focus, she begins arranging documents, border security statistics, presidential schedules, witness statements contradicting Leavitt's timeline. Each piece of evidence, a shield against the coming onslaught. Anderson Cooper's producer calls, offering a prime-time slot to respond. Crockett accepts immediately. Prepare the conference room, she instructs her staff. We're going to war. As night settles over the Capitol, 2 warriors prepare on opposite sides of the city. Leavitt for her Ingraham interview, Crockett for the defense of a vice president whose reputation hangs in the balance. Between them lies a battlefield where truth has become the most disputed territory in American politics. The morning networks crackle with Karoline Leavitt's calculated precision as she executes the next phase of her offensive. Her performances are no longer isolated strikes, but a coordinated bombardment, each appearance building upon the last with mechanical efficiency. From the sterile confines of a network green room, Leavitt reviews her talking points, a half-smile playing at the corner of her mouth as makeup artists prepare her for the cameras. The border statistics she clutches have been carefully selected. Truth weaponized through strategic omission. The American people deserve to know that while serving as border czar, Vice President Harris deliberately misrepresented detention numbers and coached officials to downplay the crisis, Leavitt tells Laura Ingraham, her voice carrying the practiced indignation of someone who has rehearsed moral outrage to perfection. Across 6 networks in 18 hours, she unveils documents suggesting Harris collaborated with funding groups tied to foreign interests. The allegations are architectural in their construction, built to collapse under scrutiny, but not before inflicting maximum damage. In congressional hallways, Republican Senator Tom Reynolds performs his supporting role with theatrical conviction. "These revelations confirm what we've suspected for years," he declares to the press pool, the exchange resembling a choreographed dance more than spontaneous inquiry. The nation's reaction fractures along familiar lines, half viewing Leavitt as a whistleblower exposing corruption, half perceiving a character assassin executing a political hit. But it's the undecided center where the battle truly rages, where doubt takes root like a persistent weed. Harris's team monitors the unfolding spectacle from campaign headquarters, their silence interpreted as either strategic restraint or damning inability to respond. Social media algorithms amplify the most incendiary clips, while fact-checkers race to verify claims that were designed specifically to consume their resources. As evening approaches, Anderson Cooper's producers prepare studio lighting for what promises to be the week's most explosive confrontation, Jasmine Crockett versus Karoline Leavitt, with Harris's reputation as the battlefield. 2 tacticians circling each other in the arena of American political combat, where truth is merely one weapon among many, and often not the most effective. The marble halls of Capitol Hill fall silent as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett strides to the podium. The air in the hearing room crackles with anticipation. This is the counteroffensive Harris supporters have been waiting for, and Crockett carries their hopes with measured confidence. She arranges her documents with deliberate precision, her composure a stark contrast to the frenetic media circus Leavitt orchestrated just hours earlier. When she speaks, her voice resonates through the chamber not with manufactured outrage, but controlled authority. "What we've witnessed is not accountability but character assassination built on manipulated data," Crockett declares, methodically dismantling Leavitt's narrative. She unveils budget reports showing Harris's administration actually increased border security funding by 24% while implementing unprecedented transparency protocols. The Congresswoman holds up Leavitt's so-called evidence, examining it under the harsh light of congressional scrutiny. These documents contain critical omissions that fundamentally misrepresent the vice president's actions. This isn't oversight, it's political theater. Crockett's presentation transitions from defense to illumination, as she highlights Harris's accomplishments in judicial reform and community safety initiatives. Each point lands with precision, rebuilding the foundation Leavitt attempted to erode. The gallery erupts in applause when she presents sworn testimony from border officials contradicting Leavitt's claims. Republican committee members shift uncomfortably as their carefully constructed narrative begins to unravel in real time. Vice President Harris has dedicated her career to pursuing justice with integrity, Crockett continues, her voice rising not in desperation, but in conviction. These attacks reflect not her failure, but her effectiveness. Across Washington, political strategists watch as Crockett transforms what was meant to be Harris's trial into Leavitt's cross-examination. Social media metrics begin to shift. Fact-checkers validate Crockett's counter-evidence, and the narrative battlefield tilts under this unexpected artillery. By session's end, the hearing room has become a theater of American political warfare, a testament to how thoroughly truth and perception have become contested territory. The battle for Harris's legacy continues, but for this moment, Crockett has seized control of the story being written. The Lincoln Convention Center pulses with expectation as the crowd falls to a hush. The aftermath of Crockett's congressional counteroffensive has created this moment, a rare opportunity to reclaim a narrative that slipped from control. Kamala Harris emerges from stage left, her silhouette framed against massive American flags, the symbolism unmistakable. As she approaches the podium, Harris carries none of the defensive posture political consultants might advise. Instead, she moves with deliberate confidence, the kind that suggests preparation rather than performance. The cameras capture her unwavering gaze as she surveys the audience, the national networks broadcasting every micro-expression to an America divided over her legacy. For weeks now you've heard accusations designed not to inform but to inflame, Harris begins, her voice steady as titanium. Today I speak not to deny but to clarify, not to attack but to unite. She methodically addresses each of Leavitt's allegations, her precision surgical rather than desperate. When discussing border initiatives, Harris reveals previously classified operational statistics that directly contradict Leavitt's most damaging claims. The crowd stirs. This is not defensive politics but offensive truth-telling. What Press Secretary Leavitt presented was not oversight but opportunism, Harris states, her tone shifting from explanation to indictment. America deserves leadership that elevates facts above fiction, service above self-interest. Behind the scenes, Leavitt watches from the White House communications room, her face tightening as each prepared counterpoint dissolves against Harris's unexpected approach. Senator Reynolds frantically texts advisors, searching for vulnerabilities in this armored address. Harris's acknowledgement of Congresswoman Crockett brings the first standing ovation. When falsehoods threaten our discourse, courage becomes our obligation, and Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated that courage while others chose convenience. The speech builds toward its crescendo as Harris reframes the entire controversy not as her personal battle, but as America's collective choice between expedient division and difficult unity. The convention center thunders with approval as she concludes with an invitation rather than a defense. I welcome scrutiny, but I reject spectacle, she declares. America's challenges require solutions, not scapegoats. Join me not in outrage, but in outreach. As Harris departs the stage, political analysts across networks scramble to assess the impact. The narrative battlefield has shifted again. What Leavitt designed as an execution has transformed into a resurrection. In the Capitol's corridors of power, a new calculation begins. Responding to Harris will now require more than manufactured outrage. It will demand substance in a contest suddenly recentered on truth. The CNN studio blazes with clinical light as two gladiators enter the political coliseum. Anderson Cooper stands at center stage, his silver hair gleaming under the merciless lights, his expression betraying nothing of the spectacle he's about to orchestrate. On one side, Karoline Leavitt, press secretary, prosecutor, predator. She arranges her documents with methodical precision, her crimson blazer a declaration of war against the studio's cool blues. On the other, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Harris's chosen defender, adjusts her microphone with fingers that betray the slightest tremor. Tonight, Cooper announces, we examine allegations that have divided Washington and indeed the nation. The battle begins not with chaos but with calculation. Leavitt strikes first, wielding charts like weapons. The American people deserve to know exactly how their security was compromised, she declares, her voice a scalpel. These documents show a pattern of negligence that cannot be dismissed as partisan fiction. Crockett counters with controlled fury. What the American people deserve is honesty, not forgeries manufactured in the basement of ambition. Her evidence of document tampering projects across screens nationwide, momentarily silencing Leavitt's offensive. But Leavitt has prepared for this siege. Congresswoman, attacking the messenger won't erase the message, she pivots, redirecting to border statistics that fall like artillery on Crockett's position. Cooper interjects. Congresswoman, your response? Crockett hesitates. 3 seconds that stretch like eternity in broadcast time. The momentum shifts imperceptibly. In the control room, producers sense blood in the water. Across America, living rooms become jury boxes. In the White House Situation Room, Senator Reynolds watches Leavitt advance their shared agenda with undisguised satisfaction. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris observes from her private study, her expression unreadable as her defender struggles to regain ground. The facts remain, Leavitt presses, sensing weakness, that under Vice President Harris's oversight, these security protocols were abandoned. Crockett rallies, invoking classified briefings that contradict Leavitt's narrative. The exchange intensifies, each woman fighting not just for political points, but for incompatible versions of truth itself. As the debate concludes, no clear victor emerges, only deeper trenches in America's ideological battlefield. What began as political theater has transformed into something more consequential, a national referendum on credibility itself. The cameras cut to commercial, but the war they've broadcast continues to rage. In homes across the nation, Americans retreat further into their separate realities, each convinced they've witnessed either justice or persecution. The truth, as always in Washington's theater of conflict, remains the first and most permanent casualty. The aftermath of political warfare often reveals more than the battle itself. As the studio lights dimmed on Cooper, Leavitt, and Crockett, America's media machine was just warming up, stoking the embers of division into a full-blown inferno. By morning, right-wing outlets had coronated Karoline Leavitt. Fox News banners proclaimed a total victory, while contributors dissected Crockett's momentary hesitation with surgical precision. Laura Ingraham's evening broadcast featured Leavitt in victorious repose, her crimson blazer exchanged for presidential blue. What we witnessed was the exposure of an administration built on image rather than substance, Leavitt told viewers, her composed demeanor belying the calculated nature of her assault. Meanwhile, MSNBC and CNN struggled to frame Crockett's performance as anything but a defensive retreat. Liberal commentators lamented her unpreparedness while carefully avoiding the substance of Leavitt's accusations. The Washington Post's headline captured the left's collective anxiety. Harris' defense stumbles as allegations gain traction. Across digital America, the battle intensified. Twitter became a fractured landscape, where 15-second debate clips, stripped of context, shaped millions of opinions. Memes of Crockett's 3-second hesitation spread like political wildfire, while Leavitt's precisely timed smirk became a rallying symbol for conservative influencers. In her Georgetown townhouse, Crockett reviewed the damage reports from Harris's communication team with growing despair. Her phone buzzed constantly, some messages offering consolation, others from party leadership demanding explanations. "I let her down," she whispered to an aide, the weight of public perception crushing her normally resolute shoulders. Senator Reynolds wasted no time capitalizing on the momentum. "What we're seeing is confirmation of patterns my office has documented for months," he announced on the Capitol steps, strategically aligning himself with Leavitt's rising star. At the White House, Harris's team initiated crisis protocols, but the narrative had already escaped their control. Focus groups in swing states were showing dramatic opinion shifts, not just against Harris, but against the fundamental credibility of her entire political project. As America retreated further into its separate realities, one truth remained undeniable. In modern political warfare, the battlefield extends far beyond the debate stage, and victory is claimed not by those with facts, but by those who most effectively control how those facts are perceived. The political battlefield rarely witnesses moments of genuine healing, but as dawn broke over Meridian Hill Park, something shifted in America's fractured narrative. Kamala Harris and Jasmine Crockett arrived without ceremonial fanfare. No motorcade, minimal security, just two women confronting a storm they hadn't created, but were determined to weather together. The modest crowd that gathered sensed immediately this wasn't campaign theatrics. "We stand before you not as politicians seeking validation, but as public servants recommitting to truth," Harris declared, her voice steady despite the week's brutal onslaught. The former vice president's eyes reflected not defeat, but a hardened resolve that silenced even the most skeptical observers. Crockett, still bearing the invisible bruises of her televised confrontation, stood shoulder to shoulder with Harris. The Congresswoman's hands no longer trembled. The uncertainty that had momentarily paralyzed her on Cooper's stage had crystallized into purpose. What happened wasn't just an attack on the vice president's record, Crockett addressed the assembled citizens and reporters. It was a calculated assault on how we determine what's real in our democracy. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt's victory lap was reaching its zenith across town. Surrounded by Republican strategists mapping their next offensive, she scrolled past footage of the park gathering with dismissive confidence. "Optics without substance," she remarked to an aide, unaware that the narrative foundations beneath her were beginning to shift. Back at Meridian Hill, Harris and Crockett moved through the crowd not as politicians but as neighbors. They listened more than they spoke. When a former Leavitt supporter questioned Harris directly about the allegations, cameras captured something remarkable, not defensive posturing, but transparent engagement. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the park, Harris and Crockett joined hands in a gesture both simple and profound. It wasn't choreographed for cameras but emerged organically, a visual testimony that solidarity founded on integrity could withstand manufactured chaos. The moment passed largely unnoticed by mainstream networks still feeding on conflict, but across social media, unedited footage began outperforming the manipulated clips that had dominated for days. Slow but unmistakable, the countercurrent of a different narrative was taking hold. In the ruthless calculus of modern politics, unity rarely triumphs over division. Yet as Harris and Crockett departed Meridian Hill that evening, they left behind something Karoline Leavitt's meticulous assault hadn't accounted for: the resilient power of truth, when calmly, persistently defended by those who refuse to surrender to cynicism. The aftermath of political warfare often reveals more than the battle itself. As evening descended on Washington, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat alone in her office, replaying the debate footage that had dominated headlines for 48 hours. "I didn't deliver perfectly," she acknowledged to her senior staff the next morning, her voice steady with newfound clarity. But principles aren't measured by performance metrics. Cal Morgan witnessed something rare in American politics: accountability without surrender. Crockett's willingness to acknowledge tactical missteps while refusing to abandon her defense of Harris reflected a strategic maturity that Karoline Leavitt's camp hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, Harris moved through a series of closed-door meetings with community leaders, her public silence deliberately calculated. When she finally emerged to address a room full of supporters and skeptics alike, her words carried the weight of someone who had weathered countless storms. "Truth doesn't require theatrics," Harris stated, her gaze unflinching. "It simply requires persistence." Behind the scenes, a new strategy was crystallizing. Documents obtained exclusively revealed that Harris and Crockett were architecting a national series of community forums, not stage-managed town halls, but genuine dialogues designed to bypass traditional media filters entirely. "We're not just defending a record anymore," confided a senior advisor close to both women. "We're building a framework for wounded communities to reclaim their narratives." Leavitt's team, celebrating their perceived victory, failed to notice the shifting ground beneath them. Their analytics showed continued engagement with their accusations, but missed the qualitative transformation happening in community centers and church basements across 3 key states. The first forum launched without fanfare in Detroit. No prepared statements, no time limits. Just Harris and Crockett moving through difficult conversations with citizens who had legitimate questions and grievances. The authenticity proved more powerful than any rehearsed rebuttal. "This isn't about salvaging careers," Crockett told a skeptical union worker who questioned their motives. "This is about proving that political discourse doesn't have to destroy the communities it claims to serve." As footage from these unscripted interactions began circulating through social networks, something remarkable happened. Engagement metrics for Leavitt's carefully constructed attack narratives began to plateau, then decline. The lesson emerged with quiet clarity. In an ecosystem designed to reward conflict and punish nuance, Harris and Crockett had discovered that solidarity rooted in shared values could outlast even the most sophisticated character assassination campaigns. Their approach offered no guarantees of conventional political victory. But as Cal Morgan observed from the back of a packed community center in Philadelphia, it represented something perhaps more essential: a template for how principled public servants might yet help mend a fractured republic. The political battlefield rarely allows for ceasefires. As autumn descended on Washington, Karoline Leavitt escalated her offensive with calculated precision, deploying a barrage of new document releases and primetime appearances on sympathetic networks. "What the American people deserve is complete transparency," Leavitt declared on Laura Ingram's show, her composed demeanor belying the ruthlessness of her strategy. "These documents speak for themselves, but truth in modern America isn't determined by evidence alone, it's shaped by who controls the narrative architecture around it." Social media algorithms amplified Leavitt's accusations through carefully cultivated outrage channels, while Senator Reynolds provided legitimizing cover from the Senate floor. "We're witnessing nothing less than the systematic dismantling of accountability," Reynolds thundered to a half-empty chamber, his words calibrated for viral distribution rather than legislative impact. Meanwhile, in a strategy session far from cameras, Jasmine Crockett and Kamala Harris studied the evolving landscape with clear-eyed pragmatism. The battle lines had solidified, with approximately 40% of Americans firmly entrenched in competing realities about what had actually transpired. "They're waiting for us to break," Harris observed, studying polling data that revealed the emotional undercurrents beneath the public's polarization. "That's the real endgame. Emotional fracture, not factual victory." Crockett nodded, understanding the psychological warfare at play, which is precisely why we don't. Cal Morgan observed firsthand how their community forums had evolved, from defensive posture to proactive movement. In Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, states where Leavitt's narrative had initially found fertile ground, something remarkable was happening. Citizen-led fact-checking networks had begun forming, not from top-down instruction, but through organic solidarity. "We're not asking you to believe us," Crockett told a skeptical audience in Lansing. "We're asking you to verify everything, ours and theirs. The difference is, we welcome that scrutiny." Leavitt's team, initially dismissive of these grassroots efforts, began showing signs of tactical adaptation. Their internal communications, obtained exclusively by Cal Morgan, revealed growing concern about the resilience of their narrative control. Engagement metrics show diminishing returns on the original framework. Read one strategic memo. Recommend shifting to secondary allegations by week's end. The American public, often portrayed as passive consumers of political theater, was revealing itself to be something more complex, capable of both tribalism and discernment, sometimes simultaneously. No clear resolution appeared imminent. What remained certain was that this clash, between manipulation and transparency, between factual artillery and emotional resilience, represented not just a political skirmish, but a battle for the very mechanics of how truth functions in a fractured republic. The weapons would continue evolving, but the territory being contested remained the same: the collective American mind, and its capacity to distinguish between what happened and what was merely made to seem so. In an age where political battles are fought with both facts and fabrications, the key to surviving and shaping narratives is calm, thorough preparation, and community solidarity. Emotional control under fire and relentless pursuit of truth not only defend reputations, but also help mend a divided society. The clash between Karoline Leavitt's ruthless tactics and the resilient partnership of Jasmine Crockett and Kamala Harris reveals that amidst chaos, unity grounded in integrity remains the most powerful weapon.